Wow, this time you've really outdone yourself. A whole stack of documents about the first Argentine Philosophy Congress in 1949.
It is quite the collection.
We have got speeches and academic papers, even congratulatory messages. It's like we stumbled upon a philosophical time
A
capsule.
multilingual one, too.
Oh yeah, there's Spanish and Italian and German and even some French. Not exactly your typical history lesson.
It does highlight just how ambitious this event really was.
Mhm.
The goal was to bring together philosophical minds from all across the globe to make it a truly international event.
Yeah, a philosophy congress in 1940s Argentina definitely piques the curiosity. I mean, what were they thinking? What kind of conversations were they having in a country known more for its tango than for philosophical treatises?
You do raise a good point.
Our mission today is to piece together this puzzle, to understand what this event was all about, what ideas were at the forefront, and why it mattered, both then and now.
Well, luckily, your collection has some fantastic primary sources that should help us unravel this philosophical mystery.
All right, let's set the stage. It's 1949. Juan Peron is in power. Can you give us a sense of the political and social climate of Argentina at that time?
Well, 1949 Argentina was very much a nation in transition.
Okay.
Perón, you see, he was a charismatic populist leader.
Right.
He had come to power just a few years earlier and was in the midst of implementing some pretty sweeping social and economic reforms.
Oh, wow.
He was a big champion of workers' rights, he nationalized industries, and his ultimate goal was to create a more egalitarian society.
Sounds pretty progressive.
He was, but his methods were often authoritarian.
Oh.
He suppressed dissent and centralized power. So it was this fascinating mix of progressive policies and a tightening grip on political freedom.
A bit of a mixed bag then.
Very much so.
And what was going on globally at the time?
On the world stage, the shadow of World War II still loomed large. Europe was in the process of rebuilding both physically and psychologically,
Right.
while at the same time, the ideological battle lines of the Cold War were being drawn.
So a lot of uncertainty.
Exactly. There was this pervasive sense of uncertainty, of a world grasping for stability, grasping for a new moral compass. And this is the context in which Argentina decides to host an International Philosophy Congress.
You're right. It's almost as if they sensed this need for philosophical guidance in these uncertain times.
An interesting interpretation, and it's further supported by the fact that the Congress was originally organized by the National University of Cuyo in 1947 as a more modest gathering
Okay.
of just Spanish-speaking countries. But then Perón's government stepped in and took it under their wing, transforming it into a national event with global participation.
So a philosophy congress gets a presidential makeover. Makes you wonder what Perón's game was. Was this just a publicity stunt to raise his regime's standing on the world stage? Or did he genuinely believe in the power of philosophy to address the pressing issues of the day?
Likely a combination of both. Perón was a master of political theater, but he also seems to have genuinely believed that philosophy had a crucial role to play in shaping a new social and moral order. And we get some valuable clues to his thinking from his own words.
Wow, okay.
Particularly in his speech at the Congress. He speaks about a crisis of values afflicting the modern world, a world adrift in materialism and lacking a solid truth to guide it.
That's pretty heavy stuff for a political rally, let alone a philosophy congress.
Yes.
So he's not just talking about abstract ideas, he's drawing a direct line between philosophy and the pressing issues of his time. It makes you wonder, what did he see as the solution to this crisis?
He proposed a solution that he called the organized community.
The organized community.
Yes, imagine a society guided by a shared ethical framework where individuals contribute to the common good while maintaining their unique identities. This, he believed, was the antidote to both the excesses of individualism and the dangers of collectivism, two forces that he saw as threatening the very fabric of society.
So not just lofty ideals, but a concrete vision for a new social order.
Precisely.
And what role does philosophy play in achieving this organized community?
Well, for Perón, philosophy wasn't just some academic exercise. He saw it as a tool for shaping the minds and hearts of citizens, for instilling in them the virtues necessary for this new society. In his speech, he even invoked Socrates and other ancient Greek philosophers as examples of those seeking profound truths, linking his vision to a long tradition of philosophical inquiry.
That's a pretty strategic move. He's trying to give his political philosophy a deeper, a more timeless foundation.
Indeed.
As if to say, it's not just Peron's ideas, it's the wisdom of the ages. But you have to wonder, was this genuine admiration for philosophical inquiry, or was it a clever tactic to legitimize his own agenda?
An important question to consider.
Yeah.
and the structure of the Congress itself might offer some clues.
Okay.
We know that there were presentations and written submissions, and even, and this is hard to believe, a standing ovation.
Wait, a standing ovation at a philosophy congress? What were they applauding? A particularly elegant syllogism?
Perhaps.
Or did Peron's vision really strike a chord with the audience?
It's possible. Unfortunately, many of the discussions weren't recorded, so we only have a partial view. It's like trying to understand a play from just a few scattered scenes.
Right.
But from the documents we do have, including Peron's speech at the closing ceremony, it's clear that his vision resonated deeply with many attendees.
Yeah.
And this takes us to the heart of the puzzle. Why? Why would Peron's vision, which was a blend of philosophical ideals and political maneuvering, captivate an audience in a world still reeling from war and grappling with such uncertainty?
I don't know. It's almost as if Peron tapped into this deep-seated longing for order, this longing for a sense of meaning and purpose in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. His organized community offered a compelling narrative,
Yes.
a roadmap to a more stable and just future.
Yeah.
And it's this allure of order, this clear vision amidst uncertainty that we need to unpack.
Absolutely.
But before we dive into the specifics of Peron's vision, let's shift our focus to the international participants. If Peron's ideas were the main act, what were the supporting players saying? How did thinkers from other parts of the world, with their own philosophical traditions and perspectives, engage with Peron's Argentina and this ambitious philosophical project?
That's where the multilingual excerpts from the Session Inaugural.pdf become particularly interesting. They offer glimpses into how this Argentine event was perceived by those coming from outside, especially from a Europe still scarred by war and grappling with its own ideological divisions.
Let's dive into those international voices.
Right.
We'll start with Gaston Berger, the French philosopher. His speech seems to really emphasize dialogue and encountering different viewpoints.
Yes. Berger's perspective is quite illuminating, particularly in the context of a Congress potentially dominated by Peron's ideology. He warns against the dangers of ignoring other perspectives, especially when it comes to philosophy.
Right.
He argues that genuine philosophical inquiry requires this willingness to engage with different viewpoints,
Yeah.
even those we might find disagreeable.
So he's advocating for open and honest dialogue, even in a context where a particular ideology might be dominant.
Yes.
That's pretty bold, especially considering the political climate of Argentina at the time. Do you think Berger was subtly critiquing Peron's regime, which wasn't exactly known for its tolerance of dissent?
It's a good question, and one we can only speculate about.
Of course.
But I think it's worth noting that Berger explicitly praises the Congress for fostering what he calls free and entirely unconstrained discussions, which suggests that he saw a genuine openness to different perspectives at the event.
So maybe Peron, despite his authoritarian tendencies, understood the value of intellectual debate,
Perhaps.
at least within certain boundaries.
Yes,
It's a fascinating contradiction, isn't it?
it is.
This tension between control and openness seems to run through the entire Congress.
It does.
But let's move on to another international voice, Hans-Georg Gadamer, the renowned German philosopher. What struck you about his speech?
Well, Gadamer's speech offers a different but equally compelling perspective.
Okay.
He focuses on the universality of philosophical thought,
Okay.
arguing that the pursuit of wisdom transcends national boundaries and historical periods. And remember, this is just a few years after a war that had torn Europe apart.
Right.
So this idea of a shared intellectual heritage must have been particularly powerful.
Absolutely. It's as if they were trying to rebuild a sense of unity, to find some common ground amidst the ruins.
Exactly.
And Gadamer doesn't shy away from the complexities of this endeavor.
No, he doesn't.
He talks about how philosophical language itself isn't neutral, and that true understanding requires the most perfect cooperation of thought from real dialogue. So it's not just about exchanging words, it's about this much deeper meeting of minds, this willingness to bridge cultural and linguistic divides.
Yes, and he even draws these really interesting connections between Spanish-speaking cultures and German philosophy. He traces a shared intellectual lineage back to figures like Erasmus and the humanist tradition.
Oh, wow.
Almost as if he's trying to show that despite their apparent differences, these cultures are all part of a larger philosophical conversation.
But was this genuine, or was there an element of political strategy at play here? Was Gadamer subtly aligning German thought with the Peronist regime, perhaps trying to find common ground in a world increasingly divided by the Cold War?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And it highlights the difficulty of separating purely intellectual pursuits from political realities of the time. It's possible that Gadamer saw in Peron's vision of the organized community some echoes of certain German philosophical traditions, especially those emphasizing the importance of the collective good.
So it's like we're piecing together this complex mosaic. Each speech, each document just adds another layer of meaning,
Yes,
another perspective on this enigmatic event.
exactly.
Speaking of perspectives, what about the messages from the Italian institutions? What light do they shed on this philosophical gathering in Argentina?
Well, the messages from the Istituto di Studi Filosofici in Rome and the Centro di Studi dei Filosofi Cristiani in Gallarate, both of them emphasize the importance of shared cultural heritage,
Okay.
particularly between Italy, Spain, and Latin America.
Right.
They see the Congress as an opportunity to strengthen these ties and to foster this sense of intellectual kinship across geographical boundaries.
It makes you wonder if there was a sense of Latin American solidarity at play here. This desire to forge a distinct philosophical identity in a world that was dominated by European and North American thought.
It's a really insightful point.
Thanks.
And it raises the question of how Peron himself saw Argentina's role in the broader philosophical landscape. Was he trying to position Argentina as a leader of Latin American thought? Or was his vision more global in scope?
Hard to say for sure, but his emphasis on creating this new social and moral order, one that transcended the traditional ideological divides, does suggest this desire to chart a new path, not just for Argentina, but for humanity as a whole.
Yes, it does.
But let's return to this concept of the organized community for a moment.
Okay.
This idea, with its focus on the municipality as this essential building block of a just society, is one of the most intriguing aspects of Peron's vision. Why do you think he placed so much emphasis on local governance?
Well, Peron saw the municipality as this vital link between the individual and the state.
Okay.
He believed that by empowering municipalities, you could create a more direct and participatory form of democracy,
Okay.
one where citizens had a genuine say in shaping their communities.
So it's not just about efficiency or local control. He's talking about a fundamental shift in how we think about democracy itself.
Yes.
Instead of this top-down system where decisions are made by a distant elite, Peron's proposing this more grassroots approach where power is distributed more evenly throughout society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He believed that this kind of participatory democracy was essential for creating a truly just and equitable society. He felt that it wasn't enough to just redistribute wealth or guarantee basic rights. You also needed to create a system where people could actively shape their own destinies.
Right.
To be more than just passive recipients of government largesse.
That's a powerful idea.
It is.
But also a potentially dangerous one. Giving more power to local communities could lead to greater inequality, with some municipalities flourishing while others fall behind. And how do you prevent local majorities from trampling on the rights of minorities? These are age-old dilemmas of democratic governance, and it seems Peron was grappling with them in his own way.
You're right to point out those potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
Decentralization, while appealing in theory, often brings with it its own set of challenges.
Yeah.
And Peron's vision, while ambitious, doesn't fully address those complexities.
But let's at least give him some credit for attempting to tackle these complex issues. His vision of the organized community, with its focus on local empowerment and participatory democracy, was truly innovative for its time.
Absolutely. And it's worth exploring how these ideas actually played out in practice.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Did Peron's emphasis on the municipality actually lead to any tangible changes in local governance?
Right.
Did it empower communities? Or did it just create these new forms of local patronage and control? The documents you've provided might hold some answers.
It's a good point. We need to move beyond just the theoretical and look at how Peron's vision was translated into actual concrete policies and actions. Did his rhetoric actually match the reality on the ground? And what were the long-term consequences of this attempt to completely reimagine the relationship between the individual, the community, and the state?
Those are all questions that historians and political scientists continue to debate today. And I think exploring those debates can offer valuable insights, not just into Peron's Argentina, but into the broader challenges of building a more just and equitable society.
Okay, so we have this compelling vision of an organized community rooted in local empowerment and guided by a shared ethical framework, but we also have the shadow of Peron's authoritarianism, this tendency to suppress dissent and centralize power. It's a really complex and contradictory picture.
It is.
It raises more questions than answers.
Indeed. And I think this tension, this interplay between idealism and pragmatism, between progressive social goals and authoritarian methods, that's at the heart of Peron's legacy.
We need to remember that Peron was operating in a specific historical context,
Yes,
a world still recovering from the trauma of war
absolutely.
and facing this looming threat of a new ideological conflict. Perhaps his vision, with its emphasis on order, unity, and a shared sense of purpose, resonated precisely because it offered this sense of stability and direction in a world that felt increasingly uncertain.
That's a very compelling argument. And it speaks to the enduring power of narratives, especially those that promise to provide meaning and order in times of chaos.
But narratives, no matter how compelling, can also be used to kind of mask uncomfortable truths,
Yes.
to justify actions that are anything but just or humane. And that's the danger we need to be aware of as we delve deeper into Peron's vision and its legacy. How do we separate this genuine desire for social justice from the cynical manipulation of power? How do we reconcile the progressive aspirations of the organized community with the repressive realities of Peron's regime?
These are really crucial questions, and ones that require a very careful and nuanced approach.
Yeah.
I think we need to resist the temptation to view Peron as either a hero or a villain, a champion of the people, or a ruthless dictator. I think the truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in between.
To really uncover that truth, we need to look beyond Peron himself, to examine the broader intellectual currents that were swirling around him. We've already talked about the contributions of Berger and Gadamer, but there's a whole world of philosophical ideas waiting to be explored.
Absolutely.
How did other thinkers, both within Argentina and beyond, respond to Peron's vision? Did they embrace it, challenge it,
Yeah.
or offer alternative paths to a more just and equitable future?
And that's where our deep dive really begins.
Yeah, okay.
We need to delve into the specifics of the discussions, examine the arguments, the points of contention, the areas of agreement and disagreement. It's in those details, in those nuances, that we can begin to understand the true significance of this first Argentine Philosophy Congress.
So let's turn our attention to the specific ideas that were actually debated at the Congress, to the philosophical battles that were fought, the intellectual alliances that were forged. It's time to get our hands a little dirty, to dig into the texts and see how these ideas played out on the intellectual battlefield. All right, so we're ready to roll up our sleeves and really get into the intellectual trenches of this first Argentine Philosophy Congress.
Let's do it.
We've got this backdrop of Peron's organized community and this fascinating mix of international voices.
Right.
But what were the specific ideas that really got people fired up? What were the philosophical sparks that were flying?
Well, one of the hottest topics was, unsurprisingly, human nature.
Human nature. Okay.
Yeah. Peron himself argued that humans are inherently social beings, driven by this need for connection, for belonging, not just self-interest.
All right.
He rejected this idea of the isolated individual, emphasizing that we're embedded in this web of social relationships.
Yeah, that makes sense considering his vision of a harmonious community. But did other thinkers at the Congress buy into this view of human nature? Were there any dissenting voices?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, some speakers fully embraced Peron's view, seeing it as justification for a strong state that guides individuals towards the common good. But others pushed back. They argued that an overly collectivist view could stifle individual freedom and creativity.
Interesting.
It's that classic tension between individual rights and the needs of the community.
So even within this Congress that Peron clearly had a heavy hand in shaping, there was still room for genuine philosophical debate.
Yes, and I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, I agree.
It wasn't just a Peronist echo chamber. Thinkers were grappling with these fundamental questions about the individual and the state and the very nature of a just society.
It's so interesting. Okay, so human nature was one flashpoint. What other themes sparked these heated discussions?
Ethics was another major battleground.
Okay, ethics.
In his speeches, Peron placed a huge emphasis on virtue and morality.
Okay,
He saw them as essential foundations for a harmonious society.
yeah.
He believed philosophy had a key role to play in actually cultivating these virtues in citizens.
So it almost sounds like he's envisioning philosophers as these moral guides,
Yeah.
shaping the ethical character of the nation. How did other philosophers respond to this idea of philosophy as a tool for moral education?
That's exactly the kind of question that emerged from the debates.
Okay.
Some speakers shared Peron's view.
Right.
They saw a role for philosophy in shaping a shared ethical framework for society. But others argued that ethics shouldn't be about these rigid codes of conduct imposed from above.
Mm-hmm.
They emphasized dialogue, understanding, and this ongoing process of ethical reflection,
Mhm.
especially within a diverse society.
So again, we see this tension between a top-down approach to morality and a more bottom-up dialogical approach.
Exactly.
Peron wants to instill virtues, while others are more interested in fostering ethical debate and critical thinking.
Yes, and this brings us to another really fascinating theme that ran through the Congress, the nature of truth itself.
True.
Peron, remember, was all about solid truth, this objective foundation for values and for social order. He really saw this truth as the antidote to the moral relativism and uncertainty of the modern world.
But wasn't this idea of solid truth challenged by some of the philosophers who were present? Didn't they have different ideas about what truth is and how we access it?
Absolutely. Some speakers aligned with Peron's view, seeing philosophy as a quest for these timeless truths. But others, perhaps influenced by more contemporary philosophical currents, they were pretty skeptical of this idea of objective truth. They argued that truth is always relative to a particular perspective or a particular context, that there are multiple ways of understanding the world.
It's almost like they're anticipating those postmodern ideas that would become so influential in later decades.
Right.
This Congress is turning out to be way more intellectually diverse than I initially imagined. It's not just a Peronist propaganda machine. There's some genuine philosophical wrestling going on here.
And I think that's one of the key takeaways from our deep dive.
Yeah.
The Congress, even though it was clearly staged under Peron's watchful eye, really did serve as a catalyst for some genuine philosophical debate, a space where all these different perspectives on human nature, ethics, and truth itself could clash and converge.
Okay, so we've got these heated debates on these really big philosophical questions.
No.
But did the Congress actually have any lasting impact? Did it change the course of philosophical thought in Argentina or even beyond?
It's hard to measure impact definitively,
Sure.
but there's no doubt that the Congress was a really significant event.
Okay.
For one thing, it brought together leading thinkers from all across Latin America and Europe.
Right.
This fostered connections and exposed Argentine intellectuals to a much wider range of philosophical ideas. So it put Argentine philosophy on the map, so to speak.
So it wasn't just a local gathering, it helped to integrate Argentine thought into a broader global conversation.
Exactly. And it helped to challenge this perception that philosophical innovation only happened in Europe or North America.
Right.
The Congress showcased the vibrancy and diversity of Latin American thought, highlighting its potential to contribute to global intellectual debates.
Okay, so it helped to shift the center of gravity in the philosophical world at least a little bit. And what about within Argentina itself? Did it spark any new philosophical movements or inspire new generations of thinkers?
That's a question that really deserves further exploration.
Yeah.
Some scholars argue that the Congress marked a turning point in Argentine philosophy,
Okay.
leading to a greater emphasis on social and political issues, and a move away from these more abstract, metaphysical concerns.
So Peron, whether intentionally or not, helped to nudge Argentine philosophy in a more politically engaged direction.
Perhaps. But it's important to remember that the Congress wasn't just about Peron's ideas.
Right.
It was really a platform for a multitude of voices, many of which challenged or nuanced his vision. The legacy of the Congress is complex and multifaceted, just like the man himself.
We need to resist that temptation to simplify history, to reduce it to these neat categories of heroes and villains. The first Argentine Philosophy Congress was a messy, contradictory, and ultimately fascinating event. It was very much a product of its time, but it also transcended that time, raising questions about the nature of truth, justice, and the good life that we're still grappling with today.
And that's what makes this deep dive so rewarding.
I agree.
We started with this mysterious stack of documents, this philosophical time capsule from a really turbulent era.
Yeah.
And through our exploration, we've uncovered a whole world of ideas, debates, and aspirations that speak to this very human quest for meaning and a just society.
You're right. We've seen how Peron's vision of the organized community, for all its flaws and complexities, sought to address the challenges of a world really struggling with uncertainty and ideological division. We've heard the voices of international thinkers, challenging, affirming, and enriching the philosophical conversation. And we've seen just a glimpse of the potential of philosophy itself to engage with the pressing issues of its time, to offer not just abstract theories, but concrete visions for a better future.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the most important takeaway is this. This search for a just and harmonious society is an ongoing process. It's a conversation that spans generations and transcends national boundaries.
Absolutely.
And this first Argentine Philosophy Congress was just one chapter in that ongoing story.
A story that each of us, in our own way, is helping to write. So as we leave this Congress behind, let's carry with us that spirit of inquiry, that willingness to engage with different perspectives, that commitment to seeking truth, however elusive it may be.
Beautifully put. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those philosophical fires burning.